My husband avoided me for 3 months, then one day cruelly said, "You're barren, you can never be a mother." A few weeks later he showed up at a surprise dinner with his pregnant mistress. I smiled calmly and said, "Congratulations, honey," placing an envelope on the table. When he opened it, the color drained from his face. "You're barren, Amy. You can never be a mother." Jeffrey delivered this diagnosis over breakfast like he was telling me we were out of coffee, his voice steady and matter-of-fact while I sat frozen with a forkful of scrambled eggs halfway to my mouth. 3 months of him flinching when I touched him, 3 months of separate blankets and gym showers, and this was his explanation. My body was broken, defective, unsuitable for the children he desperately wanted. What he didn't know was that I had a manila envelope in my purse with test results proving the exact opposite. Before we continue, if you believe that truth always finds its way to light and that deception never wins, please consider subscribing. It's free and helps share these important stories. The fork clattered against my plate, eggs tumbling onto the placemat I'd bought at that little shop in Lincoln Park. The one with hand-embroidered flowers that Jeffrey said was too expensive for something we'd just spill food on. Funny how I remembered that argument now, sitting here while he calmly destroyed our marriage between sips of black coffee. "What did you just say?" My voice came out strangled, barely above a whisper. He pulled out his phone, swiping to something he'd obviously prepared. "I had some tests done. My fertility is fine. We've been trying for 2 years, Amy." He turned the screen toward me, too quickly for me to actually read anything, just a blur of medical terminology and numbers. "The problem is you. The problem is you." For words that explained why he'd been sleeping in workout clothes for the past month, dressed like he might need to escape our bed at any moment. Gray sweatpants and a technical fabric shirt, the kind that wicks away moisture, which seemed appropriate since he'd been sweating through his lies every night beside me. His alarm had shifted from 7 to 6:30 3 weeks ago. Every morning, the same routine. Alarm, grab the pre-packed gym bag by our bedroom door, disappear before I could offer coffee or conversation. Better water pressure at the gym, he'd explained when I'd finally asked why he no longer used our bathroom, the one with the rainfall showerhead he'd insisted on when we'd moved into this Chicago apartment 4 years ago. I thought about the concert tickets in my drawer, the Lumineers at the Chicago Theater, front orchestra seats that had cost me $300. When I'd mentioned them last week, Jeffrey had suddenly remembered a project deadline. The week before, dinner reservations at Girl and the Goat had conflicted with an emergency client meeting. 2 weeks before that, a weekend trip to see my parents in Milwaukee had been derailed by quarterly reports that absolutely couldn't wait. Every plan I made sprouted an urgent work obligation, like my presence in his life had become something to schedule around rather than schedule with. "Jeffrey, I need children, Amy. I need a legacy." He said it like he was explaining a business acquisition, not discussing the future we'd planned together. "You can't give me that." My sister Carol's visit last week suddenly made more sense. She'd found his wedding ring in his car's cup holder, then in his gym bag, then on his desk in the home office. Each discovery came with a new excuse. Swollen fingers from salt, metal sensitivity, soap allergies that only affected his ring finger. Carol had pulled me aside in the kitchen, worry creasing her forehead. "He's eating nothing but takeout salads," she'd pointed out. "The man who used to beg for your lasagna is living on sweet green, Amy. Something's wrong." I'd dismissed it as stress from trying to conceive, but now I understood. Every home-cooked meal I'd made, the pot roast he used to request every Sunday, the banana bread he'd take to work and brag about, the chicken soup I'd perfected from his grandmother's recipe, he'd rejected them all. 3 months of I ate at the office, and client dinner ran late, and not hungry big lunch. He'd been building distance bite by bite, shower by shower, excuse by excuse. "How long have you known?" I asked, my hand instinctively moving toward my purse on the counter, where Dr. Patricia Young's test results waited in their manila envelope. "Perfect reproductive health," she'd said. "Optimal hormone levels. Everything functioning exactly as it should." "Does it matter?" Jeffrey stood, straightening his shirt, a button-down I'd ironed yesterday back when I still thought we were a couple working through a rough patch. "The point is, we know now. We can stop pretending this is going to work." Stop pretending. Like the last 5 years of marriage, the 2 years of trying for a baby, the temperature charts and ovulation tests and scheduled intimacy, like all of it had been an elaborate performance he was tired of maintaining. I made an appointment with a specialist. I said carefully, watching his face. To get tested. Something flickered in his expression. Panic maybe, or annoyance that I'd taken initiative without him. That's unnecessary now. We have answers. Your answers, I corrected. From your tests that you had done without telling me, without including me, without even asking if maybe we should go together. He picked up his coffee mug, his favorite one, ironically enough, the one I'd given him that said "World's Best Husband," and carried it to the sink. I was trying to spare you the embarrassment of finding out in a doctor's office. Spare me. Like he was doing me a favor by announcing my supposed infertility over scrambled eggs on a Thursday morning, his voice as casual as if he was telling me we needed to buy more milk. That's very considerate of you, I said, sarcasm creeping into my voice despite my effort to stay calm. Jeffrey turned from the sink, really looking at me for the first time in weeks. Don't make this harder than it needs to be, Amy. We both know our marriage has been struggling. This just explains why. Our marriage had been struggling because he'd been systematically withdrawing from it, but I didn't say that. Instead, I thought about the envelope in my purse, the test results dated just 2 weeks ago, the doctor's notes about my excellent fertility indicators. I thought about Jeffrey's mysterious medical tests that he'd never mentioned getting, the results he'd shown me too quickly to verify. I should go, he said, checking his watch, the Rolex I'd saved for 6 months to buy him for our 5th anniversary. I have a meeting. Of course he did. Jeffrey always had somewhere else to be when our life required actual presence. As he gathered his things, laptop bag, keys, that gym bag that lived by the door, I sat at our kitchen table staring at cold scrambled eggs and processing the last 3 months through a new lens. The withdrawal hadn't been depression or stress or work pressure. It had been calculated. Every step backward, every inch of distance, every excuse and avoidance. All of it leading to this moment, this announcement, this supposed diagnosis that freed him from the obligation of our marriage while painting me as the broken one. The apartment door closed with its familiar click, leaving me alone with the ghost of the word, Barren, hanging in the air like a toxic cloud. I reached for my purse, pulling out the manila envelope, spreading Dr. Young's test results across the table where Jeffrey's phantom medical report had been minutes ago. Perfect reproductive health. No barriers to conception. Hormone levels optimal. I wasn't barren. But my marriage certainly was. The lock appeared on Jeffrey's home office door the following Monday. Not just any lock. A digital keypad that beeped every time he entered his code, announcing his secrets with electronic precision. I stood in the hallway with a laundry basket, watching him test it 3 times to make sure I couldn't accidentally stumble into whatever he was protecting. Client confidentiality, he said without me asking, his fingers still dancing over the keypad. New regulations from corporate. You understand. I understood that Brennan and Associates had never required home security measures in the 5 years he'd worked there. I understood that his laptop had always been password protected anyway. But I nodded, shifting the laundry basket on my hip, pretending this was normal. A husband locking his wife out of a room in their own home. That night, a blizzard warning blanketed Chicago. Wind rattled our windows while snow piled against the building, but Jeffrey took a phone call in his car anyway. I watched from our 3rd-floor window as he sat in the driver's seat, engine running, exhaust pipe coughing white clouds into the frozen air. His breath fogged the windshield while he talked, gesturing with one hand like whoever was on the other end could see him. 20 minutes. 30. At 40 minutes, I grabbed his heavy coat and headed downstairs, worried about carbon monoxide or frostbite or simple human decency. But when I knocked on the car window, he looked at me like I was interrupting something sacred. He held up one finger. Wait. Then turned away, continuing his conversation while I stood in the parking garage, holding his coat like an idiot. When he finally came inside, his ears were bright red, his fingers stiff from cold. Important call? I asked. You wouldn't understand, he said, and somehow that hurt worse than if he'd just lied. The physical rejection started subtly, then became theatrical. At our neighbor Mrs. Chen's funeral, sweet Mrs. Chen who used to bring us cookies every Christmas, I reached for Jeffrey's hand during the prayer. A normal gesture, something we'd done at dozens of services over the years. He jerked away like I'd burned him, fumbling for his phone instead, scrolling through emails while the pastor talked about love and loss and the people we leave behind. I thought you were reaching for my wallet, he explained in the car afterward, which made so little sense that I didn't even respond. Who reaches for someone's wallet during a funeral prayer? In what universe would that be my intention? But the company holiday party in December. That was where he truly performed his masterpiece of rejection. We arrived separately because he had a client emergency, which meant I walked into the Brennan and Associates annual gathering alone, scanning the crowd for my husband of 5 years. I found him by the bar laughing with colleagues I'd met dozens of times. People who'd been to our home, who'd eaten my cooking, who'd congratulated us when we got married. "Oh, this is Amy," he said when I approached, like I was someone he'd just met, a random +1 he'd been obligated to bring. Not, "My wife Amy." Not, "You remember Amy." Just Amy, no context, no connection, no claim. His coworker Jennifer looked confused. "Your wife Amy?" "Amy, yes," Jeffrey said, already turning away to order another drink. Jennifer stared at me with sympathy that felt like pity. Others in the group exchanged glances. The kind that said they'd be discussing this later, probably in a group text Jeffrey wouldn't be included in. I spent the rest of the party drinking wine alone in the corner, watching my husband work the room like a single man, never once looking in my direction, never once acknowledging the ring I still wore even though his lived everywhere except his finger. The evidence planting started in January, so obvious it was insulting. I came home from grocery shopping to find our shared tablet on the kitchen counter, browser still open to an article titled, "Signs Your Wife May Be Infertile." The search history below it read like a desperate man's research project. How to tell if wife can't have babies, infertility symptoms women hide, Barren wife support groups Chicago. He wanted me to find it. Wanted me to see these searches and start questioning myself, my body, my worth as a woman. The tablet that usually lived in his locked office had been deliberately placed where I'd see it, Google's helpful algorithm serving up my supposed inadequacy in neat, searchable phrases. A week later at Barnes & Noble, I caught him photographing pages from a medical book in the pregnancy section. Not buying the book, just taking pictures of specific pages about infertility, his phone angled carefully to capture charts and statistics. When he saw me approaching, he shoved the phone in his pocket so quickly he nearly dropped it. "Research for work," he said, though his work involved financial portfolios, not reproductive systems. "Since when do investment accounts need pregnancy information?" "It's complicated," he said, already walking away, leaving me standing between self-help and pregnancy planning like a woman lost in her own life. The cruelest part was how methodical it all was. Every search, every photographed page, every planted piece of evidence, he was building a case against me, creating a paper trail of my supposed deficiency, making sure that when he finally announced my barrenness, there would be a foundation of concern and research to support his claim. My mother drove down from Wisconsin for my birthday in early February. She took one step into our apartment and I watched her face change, like she could smell the decay in our marriage through the vanilla candles I'd lit to mask it. "It's freezing in here," she said, though the thermostat read 72. She meant the emotional temperature. The way Jeffrey and I moved around each other like magnets with matching poles, never touching, always repelling. She watched him hand me a grocery store birthday card at dinner, the kind you grab from the clearance rack. "Happy birthday" in glittery letters, his name signed at the bottom. No love. No message. No acknowledgement of 5 years together. Mom cornered me in the kitchen while Jeffrey took another mysterious phone call. "Honey," she whispered, drying dishes that were already dry, "what's happening here?" "We're trying for a baby," I said, my standard excuse for everything now. "It's stressful." She looked at me the way she had when I was 7 and insisted the dog ate my homework even though we didn't have a dog. "Amy, this isn't stress. This is something else. Mom, please." "He didn't even write love on your birthday card." I wanted to tell her about the locked office, the car phone calls and blizzards, the way he'd stopped saying my name with any tenderness. Instead, I smiled. That broken smile I'd perfected over 3 months of pretending everything was fine. "We're working through some things." She left the next morning, hugging me so tight I thought she might never let go. "You know you can always come home," she whispered into my hair. No questions asked. But I wasn't ready to go home. I was still believing Jeffrey's performance, still thinking this was fixable, still hoping the man I'd married was somewhere inside this stranger who locked doors and planted evidence and treated me like a disease he was documenting for medical journals. 2 weeks after Mom's visit, Jeffrey called in sick to work. The phone conversation with his supervisor was brief, professional, his voice carrying the weight of imaginary illness. He hung up and looked at me across our bedroom, and I knew, with the certainty that comes from living with someone's patterns, that whatever came next had been planned down to the minute. He moved through our apartment with unusual purpose, making coffee for both of us. Not the single mug he'd been pouring for months, but 2 cups, measuring the grounds precisely, adding my cream and sugar without asking if I still took it the same way. The coffee maker gurgled while he adjusted the blinds in the kitchen, tilting them until the morning light fell across our table like a spotlight on a stage. "Sit," he said, pulling out my chair, the first time he'd done that in months. The gesture felt rehearsed, like he'd practiced being a gentleman one last time before dismantling everything gentle between us. I sat watching him arrange our coffee mugs just so, positioning his folder at the perfect angle beside his cup. Everything choreographed. Even the way he settled into his chair seemed calculated, his posture straighter than usual, his hands folded like a news anchor about to deliver tragic headlines. "We need to have an honest conversation," he began, and I noticed he was looking just past me, focusing on a spot over my left shoulder like actors do when they can't quite meet their scene partner's eyes. He reached for the folder, brown, unmarked, thick with what looked like official documents, and slid it across the table with the careful precision of someone handling evidence. The folder stopped exactly halfway between us, a border neither of us would cross. "I've been doing research," he said, his voice taking on a tone I'd never heard before, clinical, detached, like he was presenting quarterly earnings to strangers. "About our situation. About why we haven't been able to conceive." My hands wrapped around the coffee mug for warmth, though the chill I felt had nothing to do with temperature. Through the steam rising from my cup, I watched Jeffrey's face cycle through expressions he must have practiced. Concern, sympathy, resignation, none of them reaching his eyes. "Some women," he began, then paused, clearing his throat like the words were difficult. But I could tell they weren't. They flowed too smoothly, too prepared. "Some women just can't have children, Amy. It's not anyone's fault. It's just biology." He opened the folder, revealing what looked like medical reports, lab results, charts with numbers I couldn't quite read from my angle. His finger traced along one page, stopping at highlighted sections, though he never actually pushed the documents close enough for me to examine them properly. "The tests are conclusive," he continued, that practiced monotone never wavering. "Your reproductive system, it's just not capable. The doctors call it primary infertility. Irreversible." The doctors. Which doctors? When had I seen any doctors with him? But I kept my mouth shut, watching this performance unfold, feeling like an audience member at my own funeral as Jeffrey eulogized our marriage with fabricated medical terminology. The relief on his face was obscene. His shoulders relaxed, his breathing deepened, like he'd been holding his breath for months and could finally exhale. He'd been preparing for this moment, I realized, not dreading it but anticipating it, eager to deliver his verdict and be done with the charade of our marriage. "We need to explore other options," he said, the words flowing faster now, more confident. "For having a family, I mean. I've been thinking about this a lot, Amy. I need children. I need to leave something behind, a legacy, you understand. A legacy." Like he was a king worried about succession instead of a financial analyst who spent his days moving numbers around spreadsheets. But I remained silent, my fingers tracing the handle of my coffee mug while my mind raced to the filing cabinet in our bedroom, to the folder marked medical records, where my actual test results lived. The ones from Dr. Patricia Young showing everything functioning perfectly, hormone levels optimal, no barriers whatsoever to conception. "I know this is hard to hear," Jeffrey continued, misreading my silence as devastation rather than calculation. "But we have to face facts. You're..." He paused, gathering himself for the final blow. "You're broken, Amy. And I can't fix you." The words hung in the air between us, and that's when my grandmother's coffee mug, the delicate china one she'd given me at our wedding, painted with tiny forget-me-nots and etched in gold, slipped from my numb fingers. It fell in what seemed like slow motion, turning once in the air before meeting our hardwood floor with a sound that was both musical and final. Coffee spread across the floor in a brown starburst, reaching toward Jeffrey's feet like an accusation. The mug had broken into 5 distinct pieces, the handle intact but separated, the bottom cracked clean off, the sides scattered like petals from a dead flower. I knelt to gather the pieces, my hands shaking not with grief but with rage I couldn't yet express. This mug had survived my grandmother's marriage of 62 years, had traveled from her kitchen in Ohio to mine in Chicago, had held thousands of cups of coffee through joy and sorrow and ordinary mornings that now seemed precious in their simplicity. "Leave it," Jeffrey said, already standing, stepping backward to avoid the spreading coffee. "I'll get paper towels." But I didn't leave it. I collected each piece carefully, cradling them in my palm like injured birds. The forget-me-nots were still visible on the larger fragments, their blue paint unchanged despite the violence of the break. As my fingers found each shard, I realized I wasn't gathering broken china. I was collecting evidence of something larger shattering, something that couldn't be glued back together with apologies or explanations. Jeffrey returned with an entire roll of paper towels, dropping them on the spill from a safe distance, watching me kneel among the ruins with an expression I couldn't read. Impatience maybe. Or disgust that I was making such a production of a broken cup when he'd just diagnosed me as defective. "It's just a mug," he said. "It was my grandmother's. We'll get you another one." The casual dismissal of something irreplaceable. That told me everything. Jeffrey could fabricate medical reports, could practice speeches in mirrors, could orchestrate this entire morning like a theatrical production, but he couldn't understand that some breaks couldn't be fixed with replacement parts. Some things once shattered stayed that way. I stood, still holding the ceramic pieces, coffee seeping through the paper towels toward the folder he'd left on the table. The brown liquid reached the edge of his fake medical reports, staining them with the truth of this moment. Messy, spreading, impossible to contain. "I need some air," I said, surprising myself with how steady my voice sounded. "We're not done talking." "Yes," I said, looking directly at him for the first time since he'd started his performance. "We are." I walked to our bedroom, still carrying the broken pieces of my grandmother's mug, and carefully placed them in a small box from my jewelry drawer. Behind them, in the filing cabinet Jeffrey had never bothered to explore, my real medical records waited. Perfect reproductive health. Optimal hormone levels. Everything functioning exactly as it should. But I didn't reach for them. Not yet. Because something in Jeffrey's relief, in his practiced speech and fabricated evidence, told me this was bigger than just wanting to leave a marriage. This was about something else, something he was hiding behind medical folders and rehearsed sympathy. I stood in our bedroom for 10 minutes, the box containing my grandmother's broken mug sitting on the dresser, before I heard Jeffrey's car pull out of the garage. He was heading to his emergency client meeting, the one that materialized the moment I'd walked away from his performance. Through the window, I watched his BMW disappear around the corner, then waited another 5 minutes to be sure he wouldn't circle back for something forgotten. The door to his office stood open. Not just unlocked, completely open, like he'd been in such a rush to escape the scene of his cruelty that he'd forgotten his precious security altogether. The digital keypad blinked green, the lock disengaged, his sanctuary vulnerable for the first time in months. I pushed the door wider and stepped inside. The room smelled like his cologne, the expensive one I'd bought him last Christmas, mixed with something else. Coffee, maybe, and the faint sweetness of perfume that definitely wasn't mine. His desk was messier than he'd ever tolerate if he knew I'd see it. Papers scattered across the surface, file folders stacked haphazardly, his usually organized space showing cracks in his perfect facade. I started with the filing cabinet, my fingers walking through labeled tabs until I found one marked, Taxes 2023. But taxes weren't what Jeffrey was hiding. Beneath the W-2s and receipts for business expenses, I found credit card statements for an account I didn't know existed. The charges told a story that made my stomach twist. Victoria's Secret, $127.43, February 3rd. Another charge 2 weeks later, $89.99. Sizes listed on the detailed receipt, 32B size small. I wore a 36C size medium. There were restaurant charges too. Giovanni's, the Italian place he'd told me gave him food poisoning last year, swearing he'd never go back. 3 charges in the past 2 months. Always exactly 2 dinners, always with wine pairings. Chez Laurent, where he'd claimed the portions were pretentiously small, when I'd suggested it for our anniversary. 4 visits since December. My hands moved mechanically, taking photos of each statement with my phone, the camera click sounding too loud in the quiet office. A jewelry store receipt from January made me pause. $3.40 for pearl earrings. I'd never owned pearl earrings. Had never even mentioned wanting them. Jeffrey's laptop sat open on his desk, the screen dark but not locked. One touch of the trackpad brought it to life, his email already open like he'd been checking it right before creating his morning theatrical production. The inbox showed mostly work correspondence, but a purple flag caught my eye, his personal filing system for what he marked as important. The flagged emails were all from Angela Morrison. I knew Angela. She worked in accounting at Barren and Associates, had started about 6 months ago. Pretty blonde, maybe 28. She'd been at the holiday party where Jeffrey had introduced me as just Amy, and now I understood the sympathetic look she'd given me hadn't been sympathy at all. It had been pity mixed with guilt. The emails started professionally enough in November. Thanks for your help with the Richardson portfolio. The client loved your presentation. Normal workplace correspondence that no one would question. But by December the tone had shifted. Can't stop thinking about lunch yesterday. Your cologne is still on my scarf. Missing your touch. January brought declarations. I've never felt this way before. You make me believe in forever. Can't wait until we don't have to hide. But it was the February emails that stopped my breathing. An attached photo loaded slowly. An ultrasound image, grainy black and white, a tiny blob circled in red. The subject line, Our little miracle, 12 weeks. Her message below. I know the timing isn't perfect, but this baby is our new beginning. After you leave Amy, we can finally be the family we're meant to be. I love you both so much already. 12 weeks. I did the math quickly. Conception in November, right when the emails had started. While Jeffrey had been avoiding my touch like I was contagious, he'd been creating a life with someone else. While he'd been calling me barren, broken, unfixable, Angela Morrison had been carrying his child. I photographed everything, every email, every declaration of love, every mention of their future plans. My phone storage filled with evidence of my husband's double life, each image another nail in the coffin of his lies. But I needed physical copies, needed them organized and undeniable. The library was my next stop. I told the librarian I was working on a legal project, which wasn't entirely untrue, and she set me up at a computer in the corner. One by one I uploaded the photos from my phone, adjusted them for clarity and printed them on the library's high-quality printer. The machine hummed and clicked, producing page after page of betrayal in full color. I bought a binder from the office supply store next door. Black, professional, the kind lawyers use for case files. Back at the library I organized everything chronologically, using divider tabs labeled by month. November's professional emails. December's escalation. January's declarations. February's pregnancy announcement. Each piece slotted into protective sheets, building a timeline of deceit that no one could dispute. My hands had stopped shaking completely. Instead they moved with surgical precision, creating a weapon made of truth and timestamps. When the binder was complete I couldn't take it home. Jeffrey might find it, might destroy it before I was ready. So I drove to my sister Carol's apartment in Lincoln Park, used the spare key she'd given me years ago, and hid it behind her winter coats in the hall closet. Insurance, I whispered to the empty apartment, though I knew it was more than that. It was proof. It was power. It was the beginning of something I couldn't quite name yet. The next morning I called Dr. Young's office. I need copies of my test results, I told the receptionist. Official ones with letterhead. It's for insurance purposes. Dr. Young saw me that afternoon, running the same test she'd done weeks earlier just to make sure nothing had changed. Blood draws, ultrasounds, hormone panels. The full diagnostic panel that would prove beyond any doubt what Jeffrey's fake medical reports tried to deny. These numbers are exceptional, Dr. Young said, reviewing the results on her computer. You're in the 95th percentile for fertility health in your age group. Actually, in any age group. I rarely see numbers this ideal. Could you put that in writing? I asked. The insurance company needs detailed documentation. She printed multiple copies, each one stamped with her official seal, signed with her authoritative signature. Medical proof that I wasn't broken, wasn't barren, wasn't any of the things Jeffrey had tried to label me. Are you sure everything is okay? Dr. Young asked as she handed me the folder. You seem different from your last visit. Everything's becoming very clear, I told her, and for the first time in months, it was the complete truth. I drove home from Dr. Young's office with the folder of fertility results on the passenger seat, my mind already shifting into performance mode. If Jeffrey wanted a broken wife, I'd give him exactly that. A devastated woman grappling with her barrenness while he built his new life with Angela Morrison. The first stop was the bookstore near our apartment. I gathered armfuls of adoption brochures from the family planning section, making sure to choose the ones with the most heart-wrenching photos. Children waiting for homes, statistics about older couple adoptions, testimonials from parents who'd found alternative paths to parenthood. The cashier, a young woman with kind eyes, touched my hand gently as she handed me the bag. "Whatever journey you're on," she said softly, "I hope you find peace." I almost laughed. Peace was the last thing I was looking for. Back home, I arranged the brochures with artistic precision. One on the coffee table, partially hidden under a magazine like I'd been reading it privately. Another bookmarking the page in my bedside novel. A third tucked into my purse where Jeffrey would see it when I, accidentally, left the bag open on the kitchen counter. Our shared computer became my next canvas. I spent 2 hours researching IVF clinics, fertility treatments, and donor egg programs, making sure to create an extensive browser history. I bookmarked pages titled "When Your Body Fails You" and "Accepting Infertility: A Woman's Guide to Grief." I even created a spreadsheet comparing clinic costs, knowing Jeffrey's analytical mind would check my search history and appreciate the thorough documentation of my supposed desperation. The support group was perhaps my finest performance. Chicago fertility warriors met Wednesday evenings in a church basement in Wicker Park. I arrived 15 minutes early wearing the oversized sweater Jeffrey had given me 2 Christmases ago, the one that made me look smaller, more vulnerable. "I just found out," I told the group, my voice breaking at exactly the right moment. "My husband, he's been so supportive, but I can see the disappointment in his eyes. He wants children so badly." The other women surrounded me with genuine compassion, sharing their own stories of loss and longing. I felt like a fraud among their real pain, but I needed the receipt from the donation box, needed the attendance card they stamped, needed Jeffrey to find these breadcrumbs and believe I was drowning in the diagnosis he'd invented. When I got home that night, Jeffrey was already there, a rare occurrence. He stood in the kitchen holding one of the adoption brochures I'd left out, his expression unreadable. "You're looking into adoption?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. I thought maybe. I let my voice trail off, added a small sniffle for effect. "If we can't have our own." Something shifted in his face. Satisfaction maybe, or relief that I was accepting his narrative. "That's very mature of you, Amy. Very practical." Practical. Like choosing a different route to work when there's traffic. Not like contemplating raising another person's child because your husband has convinced you that your body is broken. Over the next week, Jeffrey's behavior changed dramatically. He started coming home later and later. Midnight, 1 o'clock, sometimes 2 in the morning. No more excuses about client dinners or emergency meetings. He'd simply walk in, shower immediately, and slide into bed without a word. The smell of Angela's perfume clung to him like evidence he wasn't even trying to hide anymore. I watched him slowly evacuate our life. First, his grandfather's watch disappeared from the dresser, the Rolex he'd inherited, which he claimed needed professional cleaning. Then his college diploma vanished from the wall, supposedly required for some professional certification update. His favorite coffee mug, the one I'd given him that said "World's Best Husband," migrated to his office and never returned. He was moving out in increments, thinking I was too destroyed to notice. But I noticed everything. I documented everything. Every missing item, every late arrival, every shower that washed away another woman's perfume. Carol became my secret weapon. She'd call when Jeffrey was home, her voice loud enough to carry through our apartment's thin walls. "Amy, honey, you need to accept what you can't change," she'd say while actually texting me links to divorce attorneys. "I know," I'd respond tearfully. "I just need to find a new purpose in life." Meanwhile, I was screenshotting Jeffrey's credit card charges for hotels during lunch hours. One evening, Carol outdid herself. Jeffrey was in his office with the door cracked and she called right on schedule. "Have you thought about teaching? Or charity work?" she asked loudly. Women who can't have children often find fulfillment in other ways. I sobbed convincingly into the phone while typing notes about Angela's pregnancy timeline on my laptop. "Maybe you're right. Maybe I need to stop hoping for something that will never happen. Jeffrey actually emerged from his office, walked over and patted my shoulder. The first time he'd voluntarily touched me in months. The gesture was so condescending, so falsely sympathetic that I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing. "Your sister gives good advice," he said, already backing away like sympathy was a limited resource he couldn't afford to waste. Thursday afternoon, my phone buzzed with a text from Jeffrey. "Dinner tomorrow at La Bernardine, 7 p.m. Important news to share. Please don't be late." La Bernardine. Where he'd proposed 6 years ago. Where we'd celebrated our first anniversary. The calculated cruelty of choosing that restaurant for whatever announcement he was planning made my hands shake. Not with sadness but with anticipation. I spent Friday afternoon in methodical preparation. The binder from Carol's apartment came home with me, its contents transferred to a manila envelope. Thick, substantial, impossible to ignore. I arranged the evidence in a specific order. My fertility test results first, proving his fundamental lie. Then the credit card statements, the restaurant receipts, the Victoria's Secret charges. The jewelry store receipt for earrings I'd never seen. Finally, the printed emails with Angela, ending with her ultrasound photo and declaration of love. Each page was a bullet, loaded in sequence for maximum impact. I chose my outfit carefully. The black dress Jeffrey had bought me for my last birthday, the one he'd said made me look beautiful before he'd decided I was broken. I did my makeup with steady hands, each stroke of mascara and armor against whatever cruelty he'd planned. The manila envelope fit perfectly in my purse, its weight reassuring against my side. I looked at myself in the mirror, not a victim, not a broken woman accepting her fate, but someone about to flip the entire script Jeffrey had written. My phone buzzed with another text from Jeffrey. "Actually bringing someone you should meet. Hope that's okay." Someone I should meet. Angela Morrison carrying his child while he called me Barren. The audacity was breathtaking, but it was also perfect. He was about to hand me the stage for my own performance with witnesses. I called for a cab instead of driving, knowing my hands might not be steady enough for the return journey. The driver dropped me at La Bernardine at 6:45, and I stood outside for a moment, looking at the elegant facade where Jeffrey had gotten down on one knee 6 years ago. The same spot where he'd promised to love me in sickness and in health, for better or worse, until death parted us. Apparently, until fake medical reports hadn't been in the vows. Inside, the maitre d' recognized me immediately. "Mrs. Hawthorne, how lovely to see you again. Your husband made a reservation for 3. Not 2. He'd actually made a reservation that included his pregnant mistress at our special place. "I'd like that table, please," I said, pointing to one in the center of the main dining room. "The one near the window." "Mr. Hawthorne requested a corner booth." "I'm sure he did." I smiled, pressing a 20 into his palm. "But I have mild claustrophobia and that table would be perfect." "Would that be possible?" The maitre d' glanced at the bill, then at my face, and something in my expression must have told him this wasn't really about seating preferences. "Of course, Mrs. Hawthorne. Right this way." The table was perfectly positioned, visible from most of the dining room, with enough space around it that other diners would have a clear view of whatever was about to unfold. I sat facing the entrance, ordered a glass of water, and placed my purse carefully on the empty chair beside me, the manila envelope inside like a loaded weapon waiting for the right moment. At exactly 7 o'clock they walked in. Jeffrey entered first, wearing his best suit. The charcoal gray one I'd helped him pick for his promotion celebration last year. Behind him, her hand resting on his arm like she belonged there, was Angela Morrison. The flowing blue dress she wore made her pregnancy unmistakable, the fabric draping over what looked like a 4-month bump. Her blonde hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup perfect, her entire appearance screaming, "I'm the upgrade." The dining room seemed to pause. I saw recognition flash across several faces. Colleagues from Jeffrey's firm, neighbors from our building, even Dr. Patel from the 3rd floor who'd attended our anniversary party 2 years ago. The collective intake of breath as they realized Jeffrey Hawthorne was escorting his visibly pregnant mistress to dinner with his wife was almost audible. Jeffrey's step faltered when he saw where I was sitting, not hidden in a corner booth but displayed in the center of the room like a piece of theater. His jaw tightened, but he recovered quickly, guiding Angela forward with his hand on her lower back, proprietary and protective. "Amy." he said when they reached the table, not quite meeting my eyes. "This is Angela from my office. I thought it was time you met." Angela had the decency to look uncomfortable, her free hand moving to her belly in what seemed like a nervous gesture. Up close, I could see she was younger than I'd thought, maybe 27, 28. She had that pregnancy glow people talk about, though it might have just been embarrassment warming her cheeks. "How lovely," I said, standing to pull out Angela's chair before Jeffrey could. "Please sit. You must be tired being so far along." Angela's eyes widened slightly at my solicitousness, but she sat, mumbling a quiet thank you. Jeffrey took his seat, positioning himself between us like a referee at a boxing match. The waiter appeared immediately. La Bernardine's service was impeccable, and Jeffrey ordered a bottle of wine before remembering. "Actually, just 2 glasses. Angela can't drink," I finished. "Of course not. Congratulations on the baby, by the way." The word baby seemed to echo across our table. Angela's hand returned to her belly, a protective gesture that might have been touching if she wasn't carrying the child of my husband. "Amy," Jeffrey started, his voice taking on that rehearsed quality I'd heard so many times lately. "I know this is difficult, but given your situation, I think it's best if we discuss the future honestly. Your situation, like my supposed barrenness, was a contagious disease we couldn't name directly. Angela and I have grown close through some difficult times," he continued, reaching over to place his hand over hers on the table. "She's been incredibly supportive as I've processed everything. Like our marriage was data to be analyzed rather than 5 years of shared life." "It must be hard," Angela said softly, speaking for the first time since sitting down. "Finding out you can't have children. Jeffrey told me about your diagnosis." The false sympathy in her voice was almost perfect. She'd clearly practiced this, probably with Jeffrey coaching her on exactly what to say. But there was something else there too, a tiny note of superiority. She could give Jeffrey what I couldn't. She was the fertile ground where his legacy would grow. "Yes, the diagnosis was quite shocking," I said, taking a sip of water. "Though I imagine there have been a lot of shocking discoveries lately." Jeffrey's hand tightened on his wine glass, but Angela didn't catch the undertone. She rubbed her belly in slow circles, a performance of maternal bliss that was clearly meant to contrast with my supposed emptiness. "We didn't plan for this to happen," Jeffrey said, launching into what was clearly a prepared speech. "But sometimes life takes unexpected turns. We have to accept reality and move forward with grace." Accept reality. Move forward. He'd actually brought me here to our special place with his pregnant mistress to deliver corporate buzzwords about accepting my deficiency. "I completely agree," I said, smiling so warmly that Jeffrey shifted in his seat. "In fact, I'd like to propose a toast." I raised my water glass, waiting for them to lift their wine. Jeffrey looked uncertain, but Angela raised her water, eager to move past the awkwardness. "To new beginnings," I said. "To truth. And to unexpected revelations." We clinked glasses, the sound crystalline in the suddenly quiet restaurant. I could feel other diners watching, pretending not to stare while absolutely staring. "Speaking of truth," Jeffrey said, setting down his glass with the gravity of someone about to deliver important news, "Angela and I wanted to be completely honest with you about our plans moving forward." Moving forward. There it was again, like our marriage was a business merger that hadn't worked out. "We're going to be a family," Angela added, her hand still circling her belly. "A real family. As opposed to what Jeffrey and I had been. Fake, incomplete, insufficient." I nodded thoughtfully, then reached for my purse with deliberate calm. "You know what? You're absolutely right. This is the perfect time for complete honesty." My fingers found the manila envelope, its weight reassuring and final. "And in the spirit of honesty, Jeffrey, I have something for you." The envelope made a soft sound as I pulled it from my purse, thick with documentation, heavy with truth. I placed the manila envelope on the white tablecloth between us, letting it rest there for a moment like a verdict waiting to be read. The restaurant's soft lighting caught the envelope's edges, and I watched Jeffrey's eyes lock onto it with the wariness of someone who'd just noticed a snake. "What is this?" His voice had lost all its rehearsed confidence. "Open it," I said simply. Jeffrey's fingers hesitated at the seal, and I could see him calculating, trying to guess what I might have discovered. Angela leaned forward slightly, curious but not yet alarmed. She still thought she was winning, still believed she was the fertile upgrade to the broken wife. The envelope seal gave way with a small tearing sound that seemed enormous in the quiet around our table. Jeffrey pulled out the stack of papers and I watched his face change as he recognized the letterhead. Dr. Patricia Young, Reproductive Endocrinology and Fertility. His hands began to tremble as he read the first page. I'd highlighted the important parts in clinical yellow. Exceptional reproductive health, optimal hormone levels, 95th percentile for fertility indicators, no barriers to conception identified. This is impossible, he whispered, the papers shaking in his grip. Angela stretched to see what he was reading, her perfectly styled hair falling forward as she leaned across him. What is it? What's wrong? These are my fertility test results, I said, my voice carrying just enough to reach the adjacent tables where I knew people were listening. Dated 2 weeks ago with confirmatory testing from 6 months ago. Every single indicator shows perfect reproductive health. The color was draining from Jeffrey's face like someone had pulled a plug. He flipped to the second page, then the third, Dr. Young's signature and official seal on each one, her notes extensive and undeniable. But you said, Angela started, turning to Jeffrey with confusion clouding her features. You said she was barren. You showed me medical reports. The reports he showed you were fabricated, I said calmly. Or should I tell her about your actual medical history, Jeffrey? His head snapped up and for the first time since he'd walked in he looked directly at me. Real fear flickered in his eyes. What are you talking about? I pulled another document from the stack he hadn't reached yet. Your varicocele surgery. 2 years ago. Remember? The urologist said it could affect your fertility. You were supposed to go back for follow-up testing but you never did. Angela's hand had stopped moving on her belly, frozen in place like she'd been paused mid-gesture. The doctor said your sperm motility was severely reduced, I continued, watching Jeffrey's face cycle through panic, denial and rage. Less than 15% normal movement. The chances of you fathering a child naturally are, well, let's just say they're not good. That was before the surgery. You never got retested after the surgery, I pointed out. I checked with the urologist's office. No follow-up appointment. No new results. You just assumed it fixed itself. Angela was looking between us now, her mouth slightly open, processing implications that were destroying her entire worldview. But if Jeffrey has fertility problems... The math was simple, brutal, and undeniable. She was 4 months pregnant. Jeffrey had documented fertility issues. The baby growing inside her couldn't be his. No, Jeffrey said, turning to Angela with desperation cracking his voice. The surgery fixed it. I had to have fixed it. That baby is mine. Angela's face had gone from confused to panicked. Of course it's yours. We've been together since November. Were you with anyone else? Jeffrey's voice rose, drawing open stares from nearby tables. Angela, were you with anyone else? No. But the word came out too quick, too high-pitched. A tell that everyone at the table recognized. Angela. Jeffrey grabbed her wrist, not hard but firmly enough that she couldn't pull away. Whose baby is it? It's yours, she insisted, but tears were starting to form in her eyes, her careful makeup beginning to run. The timeline doesn't work if I'm sterile, Jeffrey said, the word sterile coming out like broken glass. Whose baby is it? The restaurant had gone completely quiet around us. Even the wait staff had stopped moving, everyone watching this drama unfold like dinner theater they hadn't paid for but couldn't look away from. Angela tried once more. Jeffrey, please, we can get a test. Whose baby is it? The shout echoed through La Bernardine's elegant dining room. Angela flinched, tears now flowing freely down her cheeks, and I saw the exact moment she broke. David, she whispered. What? David. From accounting. Her voice was barely audible, but in the silent restaurant, everyone heard. We were together before you and I. There was some overlap. I thought it was yours, I wanted it to be yours, but the dates... I watched Jeffrey's world collapse in real time. His face went from red to white to gray in the span of seconds. The hand holding Angela's wrist went slack, dropping to the table like something dead. You knew. He turned to me, his voice hollow. You knew she was pregnant with someone else's baby? I knew she was pregnant, I corrected. The rest was just math. Your fertility issues plus her pregnancy equals someone else's baby. I didn't need to be a detective to figure that out. Angela was sobbing now, ugly crying that was ruining her perfect makeup, black mascara tracks running down her cheeks. I loved you, she said to Jeffrey. I thought we could be a family. With another man's baby? Jeffrey's laugh was bitter, sharp enough to cut. You were going to let me raise another man's child? Like you were going to let me believe I was broken? I interjected. We all make choices, Jeffrey. Some of us just make better ones than others. A waiter appeared at our table, clearly sent by management to deal with the disturbance. Is everything all right here? We'll need separate checks, I said pleasantly. I'll be leaving first. I stood, gathering my purse while leaving the envelope and its contents spread across the table. The fertility results, the credit card statements, the emails between Jeffrey and Angela, all of it laid out like evidence at a trial. The divorce papers are at the bottom of the stack, I told Jeffrey, who was staring at Angela like he'd never seen her before. My lawyer will be in touch about the timeline. Oh, and Angela. I turned to the sobbing woman. Congratulations on the baby. I'm sure David will be thrilled. The last thing I saw before walking away was Jeffrey asking Angela over and over, how could you lie to me? The same question I'd been asking myself for months, now turned back on him with interest. The maitre d' held the door for me as I left and I heard him whisper, well played, madam. Outside, the Chicago night air felt fresh and clean and full of possibility. I stood on the sidewalk outside La Bernardine, the cool Chicago wind cutting through my black dress, and pulled out my phone. Carol answered on the first ring. How did it go? Better than planned, I said, walking toward the lake. Angela's baby belongs to someone named David from accounting. Wait, what? Jeffrey can't have children. His surgery 2 years ago, he never got retested. Angela's been sleeping with a coworker. The whole thing unraveled right there at the table. Carol's laugh was sharp and bright. So he called you Barren while being sterile himself, and his mistress was pregnant with another man's baby? Karma apparently takes notes. I kept walking, my heels clicking against the pavement in a rhythm that felt like freedom. Behind me, through the restaurant's windows, I could still see our table. Jeffrey slumped in his chair, Angela sobbing into her napkins, the manila envelope's contents spread between them like the wreckage of two affairs colliding. My phone buzzed with a text from Jeffrey, this isn't over. I deleted it without responding and blocked his number. It was over. He just hadn't accepted it yet. The next morning I met with my lawyer, Patricia Chin, at her office in the Loop. She reviewed the restaurant security footage her assistant had somehow obtained. La Bernardine had cameras and the maitre d' had been very helpful, and smiled like a chess player seeing checkmate 5 moves ahead. He brought his pregnant mistress to your anniversary restaurant, she said, shaking her head. Judges hate that kind of cruelty. Add in the fake medical reports about your fertility, and we're looking at a very favorable settlement. I don't want his money, I said. I just want out. You'll take a fair settlement, Patricia corrected. You supported him through business school. You gave up your marketing career to follow his job to Chicago. You deserve compensation for that. He was right. I'd forgotten about those sacrifices, so buried under recent betrayals that I'd lost sight of everything I'd given up for Jeffrey's success. The divorce proceeded with surprising speed. Jeffrey, humiliated and desperate to leave Chicago, agreed to everything. The apartment, the savings, even alimony for 2 years. He signed papers with the defeated air of someone who'd lost a war he'd started. Angela disappeared from his life immediately. I heard through mutual acquaintances that she'd tried to convince him the baby could still be his, even suggested a paternity test, but Jeffrey was done with lies. He'd learned too late what deception felt like from the receiving end. 3 months later, I was watering herbs on the balcony of my new apartment in Lincoln Park when my phone rang. Unknown Boston number. Amy. Jeffrey's voice sounded hollow, distant. I wanted to apologize. I set down the watering can and looked out at Lake Michigan, blue and vast and honest. For which part? All of it. Calling you Barren. Angela. The whole thing. Are you apologizing because you're sorry or because your life fell apart? The silence stretched long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then, Angela had the baby. David's fighting for custody. She named me on the birth certificate initially, but the paternity test. God, Amy, she tried to trap me with another man's child. Like you tried to trap me with fake infertility? I know. I see it now. The irony. It's not irony, Jeffrey. It's justice. I hung up and blocked the Boston number too. 2 weeks later, I met Mark at a medical conference where I was presenting on healthcare marketing. He was a pediatrician from Northwestern Memorial, tall and kind with hands that had held thousands of babies. When I told him my story over coffee, the whole ugly truth, he laughed so hard he nearly spilled his latte. Your ex-husband called you Barren? He shook his head in disbelief. I've seen your test results in your medical disclosure. You're in the 95th percentile. You could probably get pregnant from a strong breeze. It wasn't romantic talking about fertility on a first date, but it was honest. No pretense, no performance, no hidden folders with fabricated evidence. Mark didn't sleep in workout clothes. He didn't lock doors or take calls in snowstorms. When he stayed over, he pulled me close instead of building walls down the middle of the bed. His phone sat face up on the nightstand, unlocked, boring with its lack of secrets. 6 months after the divorce, I planted tomatoes on my balcony, Cherokee purples and sun golds, varieties that needed attention and care but rewarded you with abundance if you were patient. As I pressed seeds into soil, I thought about growth, about things that flourish when planted in truth instead of deception. The tomatoes grew tall and strong that summer, their vines reaching toward the sun like they had nothing to hide. I gave extras to my neighbors, to Carol, even to the maitre d' at La Bernardine who'd become a friend after that night. These are incredible, he said, biting into one. What's your secret? Good soil, I told him. No lies mixed in. Jeffrey sent one last email before I changed my address. He was in Boston working at a smaller firm, living in a studio apartment. Angela had moved back with her parents in Indiana, raising David's son alone. David wanted nothing to do with either of them. I destroyed everything, he wrote. For a baby that wasn't even mine. I didn't respond. There was nothing to say that the universe hadn't already said better. Standing on my balcony now, August sun warming my face, I held a perfectly ripe tomato in my palm. It was heavy with juice and truth and the particular satisfaction of growing something real from honest ground. Mark's arms wrapped around me from behind, his chin resting on my shoulder. What are you thinking about? He asked. How revenge isn't about destroying someone else, I said, turning the tomato in the light. It's about rebuilding yourself from better materials. The tomato was warm from the sun, red as truth, sweet as freedom. I bit into it and tasted summer, new beginnings, and the particular flavor of a life grown from seeds of honesty. Below us, Lake Michigan stretched endless and blue, and the wind carried the sound of laughter from the beach, from people living lives without locked doors or fake medical reports. This was what victory tasted like, not bitter, not vengeful, just clean and true and mine. If this story of poetic justice had you holding your breath, hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Jeffrey demanded to know whose baby Angela was carrying, only to discover he'd been played by the woman he betrayed me for. What was your favorite moment? Drop it in the comments below. Don't miss more gripping stories like this. Subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss an upload.